Hello, folks. Welcome to Throwback Cinema. I am your host, the Gothic Storyteller. This is what episode 4 ish, stream number 4 of this month. Let me know if I need to readjust my mic and everything. If you guys can actually hear me a little bit more clearly, and hopefully you guys can hear the fan in the background. Hence why I kind of have this camera turned the way that I do. But hello, folks. Hello, and I knew I forgot one thing. I forgot the other backup light to lit the you know underneath me and everything, so you guys can actually see that there's something going on here, that there is a background here. I hope you guys are doing well. um today today of all days, uh we're we don't really have like a subtopic or or any of that stuff and everything. Today we mostly have a main topic, and I sound fine. Thank you so much, Jessica. I hope you're doing okay. And I actually feel like you're really going to enjoy today's stream, because we are talking about Gothic cinema. More importantly, it is the horror aspect of Gothic cinema. So for those that are watching either live or you guys are seeing the VOD and everything, if you kind of look at Gothic cinema, but it's like he doesn't mention this or that, that's why I I should have thought about that right when I was writing this. So I definitely got to edit post show, but it's like we're covering the horror aspect of it, which I have a few listings here towards the end of um you're gonna sit there and also probably see my face super bright today because I actually needed a Word doc open to have like all my notes. So but yeah, we're gonna be talking about Gothic horror today and everything in the Gothic cinema realm. And so what is Gothic horror in cinema? So what is Gothic horror? A subgenre of horror that deals with the traditional elements of the supernatural and death. What makes it Gothic horror is the romanticism and melodrama within the story. There are other elements of the sublime, power imbalances, the outsider, and isolation. Um, so that's a very brief that is a very brief way of looking at Gothic horror. Right here, we're trying to work our way through the lower thirds. I really sit there and need I really need like an actual tool to really help me finesse these a little bit easier, because Lord knows I can't remember the key bindings and everything. But yeah, what is Gothic cinema to you guys? If do you agree with that sentiment of that is what Gothic horror is, at least into the spectrum of cinema? Leave it down in the comments below and everything, and I love to sit there and read about them. But today we are going to go through, I have to remind myself not to get lost too much in the weeds of all this, but we're going to go through quite a bit of film history, to because this is like over 100 years worth of history for movies and everything. So we actually do have other timelines, eras. Some of them are actually a lot more closer to one another than you would think and everything, when it comes to this genre. And with that being, we are gonna talk about the what I would say is the first horror film. I have yet to actually personally find anything that predates The House of the Devil by the famed illusionist and filmmaker Georges Méliès. This was released back in 1896, and The House of the Devil. While it's not so much scary today, it's very comical. Uh, Georges Méliès played a lot with comedy, fantasy, and horror, and sometimes he would have it like all like in three different styles uh for what he was making. Like in The Trip to the Moon, there are a little bit of elements of horror, but it's mostly all fantasy, and there's quite a bit of vaudeville. Even though like I cannot, I probably should have looked this up to sit there and see when did vaudeville actually began. I would probably sit there say it probably began before 1896 and everything. So there are elements of that um to come and everything. I I view I view The House of the Devil as a progenitor to horror. It kind of gives you all of the elements, like the devil, who is called Mephistopheles in this short. You have skeletons, you have bats, you have witches, you have some semblance of the supernatural. And so the reason why I start here is that Gothic horror does, in a sense, have elements of the supernatural. They, there are some, they have witches, vampires, all this other stuff. And I can't help but like we can't ignore this film because this is kind of like what laid a little bit of the foundation. I'm not going to sit there and say this is the be all end all, but maybe progenitor is the term. I don't really know. Um, what would you label this? Um, I definitely know. And there is one book that I have here in the background. I probably should have pulled it out. Um, Bloody hell, I can't even sit there and find it even from here. It's you know what? Hold on. I have to find this book because it's also a very important book to read if you love horror and cinema. This one book. Trying to sit there and see if I can find it real quick. Here we go. So I think this one, Jessica, I can't remember if you bought this book for me through Throne or if someone else did, but A Place of Darkness, The Rhetoric of Horror in Early American Cinema by Kendall R. Phillips. Very wonderful book. I was able to kind of breeze through some of this. But it's like one giant long video essay that really kind of encompasses a lot of the early film stuff. But the thing is that a lot of what we're about to discuss, um, some historians do not consider it a horror story or a horror film, because quite honestly, horror had not been coined as a term of a genre quite yet. We will get to that soon. So what they did label it are melodramas, which we can sit there and add to this as we go back to the definition that we start here for what is Gothic horror in Gothic cinema. That it's the romanticism and the melodrama within the story, and there is an awful lot of romanticism in melodrama. So it's kind of funny that we get the elements of Gothic horror out before we even really get like the horror genre as a whole started. um but Georges Méliès, you can watch The House of the Devil on YouTube. It's fairly short. It's only 3 minutes long. And the plot pretty much has it where, Mephistopheles turns from a bat and he conjures up a woman and a cauldron and everything. He's performing whatever evilry that, villainry that Mephistopheles does. And these two cavaliers walk into the castle and everything. One runs away, the other one is forced to stay to battle the forces of evil, and it gets too much for him. For every attack, the horrors persist and they avoid his blade, and he pretty much gets beaten down through the horrors and everything until his buddy comes back and they're somewhat kind of able to survive the tale. So this is again, it feels like I'm gonna go here brief, but I really do feel like we have to because there is quite a lot that we're gonna go to. So we are going to switch over to our next subject of this, and that is German Expressionism. German Expressionism has a lot to do, I believe, with Gothic horror and cinema. The Student of Prague is an amalgamation of different adaptations of short stories and everything. One of them being, I think it's William Wallace by Edgar Allan Poe, if I remember correctly. This was directed by Hans Heines Illes and Stellan Rye. This was actually before, or no, this was actually post World War II. Um, no, no, post World War One. This is post World War One. Stellan Rye would sadly end up passing away within a POW camp over in France. But German Expressionism, that in itself is a whole discussion for later. It really is. It's an entire discussion for later, where it is pretty much the anxieties and the fear and everything that comes from uh that came from the wartime, and a lot of these filmmakers who came here were expressing those anxieties, those fears, um those dark recesses of the human mind and everything. They put it within cinema. It doesn't just belong to the realm of cinema. There's like actually like a whole movement. I believe it's also in literature as well. But mostly it was, I think, first discovered through painting. But a lot of people probably know German Expressionism through the filmmaking art form. But yeah, The Student of Prague. It's been a while since I've seen this one. I think I remember seeing the 1926 remake, which, yes, they made a remake 13 years after the original one. So for those that kind of wonder, ooh, Hollywood's out of ideas, is like, look, they waited 13 years and they just remade the same film and made it just a tad bit longer. The original, I believe, is 88 minutes long, and the 26 remake is 91 minutes. And I think The Student of Prague was also remade several other times. It's just one of those films that people never heard of, and they're like, there's a remake of this, and it's like, well, there's quite several. There are several different remakes, but yeah, remakes have kind of always been around. The Student of Prague is one that I would say check out. It's the oddball out of the three that I did pick, because the next film, obviously, is The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and I feel like that's where a lot of people remember the art style of German Expressionism. And there's an awful lot visually that comes to Gothic horror in cinema. The way how light and shadows are played, the supernatural elements, but there's also a psychological twist to it. Others have viewed The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari as the first psychological horror film or psychological thriller. It's one of the first films to actually implement that into its narrative and in its story. And I absolutely love this one. I think probably right next to Nosferatu, this is probably up there with the like one of the most German expressionistic films that I've seen in my life. And it's just because it's a really, really good film. Like for its time, the art style, the lighting and everything. One would not sit there and think that this was made in the time of 1920, but it is. We are 7 years past The Student of Prague, which you can kind of sit there and see here just by like this one still that they really haven't kind of twisted the world so much. It's still early cinema. They are still trying to figure out the film language, the mise en scènes of all thing. If you're wondering what mise en scènes is, that's got to be for another video, because God, I feel like I'd be letting my professor, my film professor, film histories professor down, to like not really sit down and actually have a discussion with it. But I feel like that's something I'm gonna have to talk about on a later date. But yeah, German Expressionism, Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Oops, I skipped a little too further. If you really want to sit there and get a really good visual of early Gothic horror, this is the film for you. As much as what Méliès did with House of the Devil, with kind of giving us a few tropes to play with and everything, this is where I kind of sit there and feel like the genre is starting to take a little bit more of a tangible form. You'll actually know what this is. This does not look like a comedy. It could possibly pass as a fantasy. if you know the story, then yeah, you could probably pass it as a fantasy, but in its heart, it is a horror film, at least to me. I know film historians will label it, well, no, it's a melodrama because horror was not coined yet. So technically, there were no horror films past a certain point. It was all melodramas. But to me, it's like if it looks like a horror film and feels like a horror film, it's a horror film. I know that there are some people that will probably look at certain horror films as, oh, well, that felt like a thriller to me than a horror film. And thrillers and horror films to me share an awful lot in suspense, dread, fear, anxiety, all those things. But I've kind of always been able to differentiate one from the other as, well, one lets you see a little bit more of the horror, compares the other one plays full psychological into the camera angles. Maybe light and shadow are the ones that actually show the demise, and that's where the real fear comes from. And you kind of look at that maybe as thriller. It's kind of a tough line to dance around. It really is. I don't really sit there and know um which one you would go with. Um but moving on to 2 years later after this, we would have F.W. Murnau's essential masterpiece, Nosferatu. And again, this goes and sit there and shows you guys everything. Where Cabinet at the Caligari started taking form in its horror genre, especially with the Gothic horror subgenre. I feel like Nosferatu perfected it and did really really well for its time, because once we wrap up our stay here for German Expressionism, the sad thing is that I don't want to sit there and say that film had devolved, but there was something that happened that we were pushing the envelope artistically and what we can do with the camera, and then it kind of like we slowed down and we stopped being super artistic with it, and that I think we were being a little bit more conservative with how we spent our money on the sets and what did that money go through when it came to building. It's like, I don't know if maybe if some people just wanted to get away from the horrors of the war, and maybe these films were what reminded them of that. And so there had to have come a change. And that change out of German Expressionism, which lasted all the way from the 1910s to the 1930s, would soon go into the Universal Horror, which that went from 1913 to 1956. We're not covering every single film here from Universal Horror. I know it's a very, very popular one, but we are going to focus on two films that came out in February of 1931 and in November of 1931. 1931 was a very, very popular year for cinema. It was just very, very popular, and like there was so much taken from the German Expressionism that at this point, 1931, World War II was already going on, I believe. A lot of the filmmakers from Germany, UK, wherever you name it, they were migrating over into the US. And what we ended up getting were films like Dracula and Frankenstein. And when Dracula came out, again, it wasn't labeled a horror film because horror has yet to gain that term quite yet. But this is the year that the term does apply. So instead, they actually sold this as like a dark romance. That Bela Lugosi's Dracula was a dark romance, and that was the way that they could, I guess, dance around with the very dark matter or subject matters of like, well, the guy's a vampire and he drinks blood and he goes after these beautiful women. That doesn't really sound like a romance today. That is, I mean, it's fucking Twilight. He's handsome. He doesn't feed off the blood of people, he feeds off the blood of animals, and he shines. But also too, I feel like vampires in cinema today have kind of lost that Twilight shine, and they've kind of gone back to being scary. But this is kind of the most iconic form. There were vampires in The House of the Devil that do pop up. They were more related to like bats, and everything, because it's supposed to be like a vampire bat. supposed to be a lot more scarier. But like this is like actually a film, post Nosferatu that also handled this genre and tried to sit there and handle it very, very seriously. Not saying that the German expressionistic films weren't handled very seriously, um, but I feel like more in the way of production and everything went up, but at the same time, kind of a little bit of the art direction went down. Um, Dracula by Todd Browning came out in February, was labeled a romance film and everything, whereas the advertising going into Frankenstein in November, and it's funny enough that they dropped Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein in November as well. That's like, oh my god, I'm having to do math. Um, oh bloody hell, what would it have been? Uh, you know what? It's time to pull out the trusty calculator because I really need to do math. It came out this year, 2025. I can't believe I'm having to do that. Nearly 100 years. It's 94 years later, and they dropped Frankenstein. Like I highly doubt they dropped on the exact date that the original came out, but you can't help but notice they dropped the two same films at the same time, within the month and everything, and like at 94 years apart. But this was the crowning jewel of the first horror film. But if you kind of look at it and rewinding back to what we've kind of gone through with the silent era, with House of the Devil, as that being the progenitor of the horror film, you look at the stuff of German expressionism of the Student of Prague, and you look at Nosferatu, two major things that I feel like you see it all the time in Gothic horror is that they are all based off of literature, all based off of Gothic literature at that. Their Gothic literature existed before this. And so this year, 1931, Dracula and Frankenstein were adapted. Dracula was a horror novel. They labeled it as such. Frankenstein was a horror story, but also it was kind of labeled like the first science fiction film, because science was the key at it. And I feel like this year, you kind of start with a very supernatural tale, and then this one, it's a very Gothic tale, but it's rooted deeply in science. And a lot of the morality comes from the man that brings the creature to life, even though he's not the main character. Which again, to put a pause here on Frankenstein, I actually do have a Frankenstein video out right now called "The Baron Hammer's Frankenstein." You guys should definitely go check that out, because I do a comparison piece between Henry Frankenstein that we see here and then later on in this stream when we discuss Hammer. Again, this was a monumental era for Universal. 1931, they released two big hits. This kind of starts the whole Universal horror line. Even though before this, I think The Hunchback of Notre Dame and Phantom of the Opera, which were done by Lon Chaney Sr., had come out, but for some reason in some lists they bring those silent films over as like, yeah, it's part of the Universal horror lineup, but then some people look at it as, well, no, it was before, it's pronounced Frankenstein. Thank you, Steven. It's pronounced Frankenstein. How could I forget? Shit, now I forgot. Oh, Igor. Well, then it's pronounced Igor as well. You can't say Igor. It's pronounced Igor. I hope you're doing well. But yeah, 1931 was when horror was crowned. You can't help but see the Gothic elements, again, of the sublime, of power imbalances and everything, the outsider, isolation. I don't really sit there and think too much that Frankenstein was a melodrama, but I'm pretty sure some people would throw in there that, yeah, there was some melodrama, but there's a shitload of romanticism in both Dracula and Frankenstein at that time. And I'm actually trying to look to make sure that we're not going too far, or not too far. We're not going too fast for you guys and everything, because after, I would like to sit there and say the 30s was the best year for Universal, and then once we got into the 40s, that's when we started getting a lot of the crossovers. The Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, House of Frankenstein, House of Dracula, we started getting those crossovers, and then we get the Abbott and Costello stuff. Um, we would get Creature from the Black Lagoon, which I guess in its sense is kind of a bit of a gothic horror film and everything, but I feel like it's a little bit more kind of like The Mummy. It's more of an adventure film where it is these guys who should not be here venturing off into unknown territory, invading someone else's home, and then the person whose home's being invaded, pretty much starts attacking, but they're labeled as the bad guy. Um, I guess you would kind of like describe it like that, but looking at the sequels to those movies, they they don't really hold up too much of the gothic. They kind of wear like the skin of it, but they don't really sit there and bring a lot of the themes and tropes, or they'll recycle, but eh, it doesn't really work. I don't know. To me, I don't feel like that works. Um, I definitely feel like probably for Universal, its gothic themes really stopped hitting probably after the Wolfman, because I think Invisible Man came out before the Wolfman. If not, Jessica in chat, if she's still here, she can correct me. Which came first, the Wolfman or Invisible Man? I want to sit there and say I think the Wolfman was the second to last monster they created, because then the last one would be the Creature from the Black Lagoon. But we are going to move on to, again, another era. We jump ahead to the Gothic Revival. So originally I looked at the Gothic Revival as something that happened throughout the 60s. But the more I start thinking about it, it's like it kind of happened pre-60s. It was building itself up, and then the 60s was the powder keg of it. And so what we do have to sit there and discuss with this is the Hammer films, because the Hammer films, they had kind of did a sequel remake of the Quatermass Experiment, which was a science fiction horror-ish kind of series and everything. And then with the success of the Quatermass Experiment, because the other ones were serialized storytelling, I think this other one was like an actual film. They saw the success of it, and Hammer wanted to sit there and break new ground. They wanted to do something a little bit new, a little bit more refreshing. What? I need a little bit more context in a letter. Oh, thank you. Message retracted. Okay. But Hammer wanted to sit there and do something different, and so they start remaking the Universal classics and adapting the classic Gothic literature that made Universal's, first decade, magical. made movies. MC made movies. I need a little bit more than just MC, because that could be male character, main character. The MC made movies. I need a little bit more than that, Steven. I apologize. But yeah, Hammer practically kind of revitalized the Gothic genre. It revitalized it. It gave it color. It made it sexier, bloodier. The characters were far more complex, especially Peter Cushing's Dr. Baron von Frankenstein, the 90s. Oh, Hammer time. Oh, MC. Oh, Jesus fucking Christ, Steven. You gave me a dad joke that went completely over my head. Like, zoom, completely over. I'm like, MC made movies. I was like, what? Hammer time? I was like, oh, Jesus Christ. We're not yet to the 90s yet. We're not yet to the 90s. But yeah, Hammer films, The Curse of Frankenstein, The Horror of Dracula, both came out in 57 and 58. This is kind of, I wouldn't really want to sit there and say it's the full revival, but this is, things are stirring. People are actually getting more into the Gothic genre once more. And yeah, it was just a powder keg. We wanted more of this. The Baron Frankenstein is murdering people for body parts, and he's having affairs, and he's destroying every working relationship with every person that he knew, all for the sake of science and for the ambition that I have created life from dead flesh. And then he ends up going to the guillotine for it, because he ended up, being practically blamed for the murder of his mistress slash maid, and his buddy didn't come to his side. Dracula, I feel like really there is like nothing more that kind of changed with Dracula other than, again, they made it bloodier, sexier. Christopher Lee was probably a little bit more of an honest Dracula character, of someone that was very sexy, but at the same time he was a monster. Bela Lugosi, I felt like played more of a very suave Dracula, like Marlon Brando, I guess, of sorts, before Marlon Brando of Dracula. You know, he was very suave. He could lure you in with his eyes and his accent, whereas Lee didn't. You know, like Lee lured you in. He was very charismatic in himself, but he didn't have to use the accent to do that. It was all within his body posture and his actions. Uh, so this is kind of like the stir. The Hammer horror boom would go from the late 1950s all the way into the 70s. 70s is whenever they just kept kind of popping out remakes and sequels, and it just wasn't working. And the studio kind of went into a hiatus and didn't come back until much later. Um, Another thing that we have to discuss, Sandler, blah blah blah. Yes, thank you. Yes, Adam Sandler. Adam Sandler practically, I think, was like the best caricature of a Lugosi Dracula. Um, but another thing that popped out of here through this Gothic revival is the Italian Gothic subgenre. And this as well evolved into a whole nother genre as well. But we got Mario Bava's Black Sunday and Black Sabbath. Oops, we jumped a little too ahead. I keep forgetting that some of these I only gave one image. But Black Sunday, I do believe that we've discussed a little bit of this in Black Sabbath. There's actually a video that does cover quite a little bit of Black Sunday with the Barbara Steele Queen of All Scream Queen videos. You guys can check that out on YouTube. But Black Sunday is your very typical Gothic story. There's a curse involved. This witch was turned over to the religious authorities by her brother, and so right before she is burned at the pyre for, or no, not burned at the stake, right before she what do you call it? Because it wasn't really an Iron Maiden, but it's something of an Iron Maiden construct that they essentially tied this poor woman down. Had a mask with spikes. I think it was something kind of like a devil mask, and it was supposed to prevent the evil from escaping and I think invading another body. So it kept the evil within the body. And they had some big burly dude hold up a hammer and just smash that hammer into her freaking face. It's a very grueling Iron Maiden like contraption, probably the early forms of that torture device. But yeah, she's interned and everything. But she has also vowed vengeance, and 2 centuries later, she does that. She finds this reincarnation that looks exactly like her, named Katya. And the men in the story are trying to save Katya while also trying to defeat this witch who has been reawakened. And she has like a servant, and so there's a lot of these tropes here and everything, like curse, supernatural being that's preying on a woman, and the male figures are practically trying to save this female figure and stop it. You pretty much, if you look at Black Sunday, is Dracula, but they just took the vampire aspect out of it, and they made it a witch. They made it a witch who had sold her soul to the devil, and she has all this power. If you haven't seen Black Sunday, it is a remarkable film. I think one of the most sinister moments is the cemetery scene, I believe, whenever she's being reawakened, and she has this servant here whose like face is kind of rotting off, and he's kind of becoming a bit of a ghoul. So there's your Renfield element right there into this. And he is helping her, you know, in her rebirth and everything. And there's just something eerie about just the cemetery and how the fog bank rolls right in, and it's creepy. It's creepy. It's undisturbing, or it's very disturbing, not undisturbing. It's very disturbing. But also too, it's such a beautiful visual. The mise-en-scènes of the whole situation, we know shit's going down. And the further we watch, the more we'll understand that. Black Sabbath would come out 3 years later after Black Sunday. Again, another Mario Bava classic and everything. That's where the iconic metal band Black Sabbath got its name, apparently, was through this film. And Black Sabbath actually started doing, I would sit there and say it kind of reignited the anthology series, because again, I believe at this time, Twilight Zone was already kind of going on. um I don't think it was in syndication quite yet, but I believe the Twilight Zone was going on. um we had already had previously anthology horror films and everything in the past, from like German expressionistic period, like Eerie Tales. And there's been some other films in between that time and Black Sabbath where there has been this anthology, but I feel like this also kind of revived the horror anthology as well. But still staying with the Gothic horror roots, this also became Italian Gothic horror. Um, and this went on again all the way into the 1970s. But I want to sit there and say it is the early 1970s when we started seeing the giallo subgenre, which was based off of paperback books of cheap mysteries where there was either a supernatural force at play, that the main character has to solve the case, who's murdering all these beautiful women, or all these people in very grotesque manners. Who's murdering them? Is it a supernatural being, or is this being just so damn good that you think it's supernatural, but really it's more of a psychological take on it? Um, After Black Sabbath and everything, Bava would go into that. He would kind of help form that genre along with Dario Argento and many other Italian film directors. So it's funny that as we're talking about Gothic horror, I had previously had mentioned the Hammer stuff. So now you have the British Gothic horror, or just the British horror, because I feel like kind of most of all British horror at that time was just Gothic. And then you have the Italian Gothic, which Bava kind of helped make his own thing. Um, and then at the same time that Bava was making waves with Black Sunday, over here in the Americas, Roger Corman had revitalized the Gothic genre with his Poe films with Vincent Price. And from 1960 to 1964, I'm trying to fix this here in my outline. He would release House of Usher, Pit and the Pendulum, Premature Burial, Tales of Terror, The Raven, The Haunted Palace, Mask of the Red Death, and Tomb of Lygia. And all of these shared the same elements of Gothic horror and everything. There is some type of brooding main character, who probably has some type of crutch of either he's lost a dear loved one, or he has, quite honestly, either fallen to madness or he is falling into madness as we go. House of Usher is obviously an adaptation of The Fall of the House of Usher. Pendulum is the same thing. Premature Burial is a short story that does not have Price in it, but has I cannot believe I am forgetting this actor because he was also in Godzilla. Um, Ray Milland and everything, because Ray Milland was in the American cut version of Godzilla King of Monsters. But Ray Milland was in that one because that one was made by a separate company, but Corman still directed it. Tales of Terror, again, was another horror anthology. The Raven, The Haunted Palace, which is more in line to a Lovecraft story. I cannot, for the life of me, remember. And if we keep going, like, I'll be on the internet just falling down a rabbit hole. I'm not going to lie to you. But yeah, The Haunted Palace, based off of the poem, but it's predominantly a Lovecraft story. Mask of the Red Death, which I think is probably should have been the film to really close off this. I like Tomb of Lygia, but it has its issues. But the Corman post cycle to all this and everything, it peaked in everything for the Gothic horror and everything. It screamed that we still love these types of films. And before we kind of move on into our modern Gothic, I have to like look back here and everything of where did our Gothic horror originate from? I think most people can look at it as like it originated just from the adaptations of Gothic literature, but I feel like it goes a lot more deeper in that because of House of the Devil. That we had already had that there. We just haven't had adaptations quite yet. Because because I think it's 1903. Maybe it's actually a lot more sooner than that. Well, we would have Thomas Edison's Frankenstein. Uh, and I cannot remember if that is a lost silent film or not. I believe it's lost. But but yeah, like we have that, we have the German expressionistic movement, and then we kind of have, I guess, what you would say is our first Gothic horror movement, which is the universal horror stuff. And then we jump right off ahead that it's practically 29 years later, and we have this whole, or around about 29 years later, we have this whole revitalization of the Gothic genre and everything. And it's not just here in America, it's everywhere around the world. And with that, you have these other type of subgenres. You have the Italian Gothic horror, you have the Giallo, British horror and everything, which I know I just sat there and said British horror is practically just fucking Gothic horror at this point. If anyone would like to prove me wrong, I would 100% like that and everything. I would like to sit there see what are some early UK horror films that would probably have not fallen under the banner of Gothic horror. But we jump to the modern Gothic, and I was trying to figure out where do we start with modern Gothic, and with that, I figure probably the most modern that we can get are the 80s, and that is because of Tim Burton. The early 80s were his short films, and in the late 80s were his feature films. But we're jumping around like different decades now at this point, from the 1980s until the present. Would you? Well, I mean the British horror films of those times, of like the 50s, because I believe Britain was like also, I think, taken over by we're taken over by Doctor Who, so science fiction, everything. Quatermass Experiment was, or the Quatermass and the Pit, I believe, or no, I think it's just called the Quatermass Experiment. I think that's the original serial, because it was 1 and 2. They were serialized, if I believe so. I could be actually wrong, but I think those were also looked at as just science fiction adventure films and everything. But yeah, I guess outside of that, Shaun of the Dead, yeah, that's not really a Gothic horror film. That's a very meta comedy commentary on society through the lens of what George Romero did. But yeah, modern day horror, as we go through this and everything, we start getting well, for one, let me backtrack a little bit here for modern. Let's tackle Tim Burton here, because from what I've shown you guys with German Expressionism today, and if you've ever sat there and seen any German Expressionistic films, and then you look at Tim Burton, you could just definitely tell this man took that art style. He took that art style and did his own thing with it. And I'm all for it, because it kind of feels like that history doesn't get forgotten now, because people look at that, they're like, oh, that's what Tim Burton's movies look like. And it's all like, you know what? I'll take that. It's a half victory. It's a half defeat, because most people don't know of that. They'll just probably call it a silent film. But for the most part, Tim Burton has taken that old film movement and art style movement and turned it his own thing. And that's when you kind of get stuff like Vincent. And then even like with like Frankenweenie. Frankenweenie is kind of like a subverted Gothic film. And you kind of get that too with Beetlejuice, and you get that with oh my god, not Sleepy Hollow. What's the one that came out before Sleepy Hollow? Edward Scissorhands. Is that there are Gothic elements in this, but it's all subverted to try to make it fresh, not feel so old. So like Tim Burton did that, you know, he made his art style mean something while taking from the past and everything. And he was able to sit there and take those Gothic elements and bring it in. Like, do I think Tim Burton's goth or anything? I don't know. Do I know that he actually took this from the German Expressionistic movement? I don't know. I would love to sit there and talk to him one day and really ask him, hey, so are you an obvious fan of German Expressionism? You know, maybe he'll smile. Is like, well, what sold you on that? It's like, Your whole artwork is practically that. Um, and that's not me knocking the guy. I truly fucking love. I love what he does and everything. There's only been a few Tim Burton films that I think I've been ever let down, but when I look at his older work, everything that he released, I loved. Um, Another classic, I guess we can call it a modern classic and everything that definitely it doesn't even, I don't even think it even subverts the Gothic tropes and everything. But it really ups the romanticism element of this is Bram Stoker's Dracula, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, starring Gary Oldman, Winona Ryder, Keanu Reeves in that really bad British accent. I love this film to death, but that's a really terrible accent. Um, I think it was Tom Waits as Renfield. It was an all-star cast. Carrie Ewells as Lucy. Yeah, is it Lucy? Yeah, I think it's Lucy. No, it's Lucy Westerna's uh engaged partner, because I don't even think that they were even married yet, if I remember correctly. It's been a while since I've seen this film, but like this film is stoked completely in the Gothic and in the romanticism. I guess you would sit there and say there's a little bit of melodrama, but I definitely feel like this is a film that kind of lost a little bit that Dracula was a monster, and they're all like, oh well, he's just a man that felt betrayed because the Turks really fucked over his whole people and made his wife believe that he had died and perished during the war, and so she just couldn't live with herself without her love. He comes back, and it's like, my love is gone, but now she's reincarnated over 100 years later as this other woman. Um, Gothic horror, I still label that, but it's a very romanticized interpretation of Dracula that I still personally love, and I feel like that took over the 90s. I feel like the majority of the 80s kind of got lost a little bit in the Gothic. There were some Gothic films, but they weren't really, really big. Dang, you just Paul Dano Keanu Reeves. I love Keanu Reeves, but I'm not saying he's a terrible actor and that everything he does lowers the film standards. No, because you know what? Keanu Reeves makes it work. He makes it work for what it is and everything. But to me, he will still always be known as Ted Theodore Logan. Or Constantine. I'll take that too. I've always seen him also more as John Constantine. Jumping out of the 90s and going into the early 2000s, we have The Others, which is all steeped again in Gothic horror. I know that probably some other people is like, well, why haven't you mentioned this one Gothic horror film or this other? There's so much, and we only have so much time. This is an intro to it, so I do apologize. We're jumping around to different decades now to kind of tackle just how it's kind of evolved. But The Others is another one. At the end of it, you kind of sit there and wonder, are you really watching a supernatural Gothic tale? Or are we just watching one hell of a psychological drama? I think both. It's part supernatural and part psychological horror. And I don't know why, but I feel like if it was released today, it would definitely be labeled an A24 film. I really do sit there and think so. I don't think that the film tries not to be a horror film, but it definitely puts its drama very upfront, which is why I think that's where like a lot of the psychologicalness, it's like, does it want to be a thriller? I don't even know if you could throw The Sixth Sense up there as Gothic. I don't really sit there and think so. Like, it has some elements of the Gothic, but I think it still sticks to its guns that it is a thriller, because M. Night Shyamalan does thrillers, and then at one point he does meta commentary superhero films, and then at another point he does fantasy, very subjective fantasy. I like the Lady in the Water, but I also kind of know that that's probably one of his hated films. It is what it is. Before we jump from The Others, there was another set of Gothic films that I was actually thinking, could I actually implement these into Gothic horror? But I actually can't, because they feel more like they're action films with horror skins on them. And that would be Underworld and that whole entire franchise. I think I stopped keeping up with the continuity after 3. That was Rise of the Lycans, right? That was the prequel. Yeah. But yeah, Underworld, um, and then Van Helsing, which both of them are very much steeped in the Gothic genre, but they're more action films. You don't really feel scared for any of these characters. Like, you know that they have a certain set of skills, and this is paraphrasing Liam Neeson, that even a monster does not hold up against them. Um, and I'm sorry, I didn't even like sit there and skip ahead to this image and everything, but yeah, I kind of feel like I would have to kind of skip those and everything, because I think Underworld came out in the same time frame as the others did. The early 2000s actually had a lot of really, really good films, in the horror genre esque, and I kind of feel like we've forgotten them. But this was also too. This was like the era that we were remaking J horror movies and everything. Um, Again, Tim Burton right there, Corpse Bride, absolutely wonderful. That is a Gothic horror film. It's a very Gothic drama. Um, and then our final one, I don't have every one of his films listed here, of the 4 films, and he's now working on film number 5, which is Werewolf. But Robert Eggers, I feel like Robert Eggers has kind of taken on that role of um, Tim Burton, where he's now become like the next Gothic horror filmmaker and everything. The Witch kind of has some of that, but you can also kind of just look at it as Eggers loves his history, and so he loves just telling like these very psychological, supernatural tales in the history. I truly adore him. I loved every film that he's released. I've yet to see The Northman, so that may actually change. But I saw Nosferatu opening weekend. Chef's Kiss, that's pure German expressionism, Gothic horror, Gothic drama. That is what it is. The Lighthouse, I kind of feel like more of the play between light and shadows and the psychology, with a little bit of twist of supernatural. That kind of falls underneath the Gothic horror genre. And then I guess you could sit there and say the same thing with The Witch, but I think also too most people would throw The Witch underneath folk horror, which is fair. I feel like with a lot of the films that I find, I would either label them as Gothic horror or folk horror, and there'd be some people that are like, well, it's more folk horror than Gothic. And I was like, okay, I could kind of sit there and I can see where they're coming from with that and everything. But I still kind of think that it's kind of like almost the same thing of, well, what constitutes a horror film and what constitutes a thriller? I think it's more subjective and it's more into your taste. But if there is, I thought you were going to say Michael Bay. Did Michael Bay ever do a Gothic horror? I don't think he ever did. I think the only movies Michael Bay did were Bad Boys, Armageddon. God, that practically took up the majority of his early 2000s. And then the Transformers. I can't think of anything else Michael Bay has ever done in his career outside of those 3 properties. Oh my God. Yeah, you know what? Now that I got to think of it, he's like another James Cameron. At least though, when he produces a film, it's fucking good. I'm sorry, but James Cameron hasn't made another good movie since Terminator 2. And I guess it's producing stuff on Titanic. But Steven knows my emotions for James Cameron. Anyway, back to what we're sitting here and saying. In the future for covering Gothic cinema, again, we covered horror, and there's so many other subgenres that I have yet to sit there and mention, like the other side of the coin of Gothic cinema, where we would get films, and I'm pretty sure some people are wondering, Rebecca, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, Wuthering Heights and everything. A lot of these other films that are also based off of novels. You could also sit there and say Eyes Without a Face, which is a French horror film. I was actually sitting there and thinking about like separating the UK and the American stuff of the 60s and actually just kind of refer to it as Eurogothic, but I didn't want to get too much in the weeds and everything of that, but you have films like that. But the other side of the coin, Rebecca, Wuthering Heights, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, those are kind of the other side. Those are the more like serious dramas that actually have the Gothic overtones to it that I would label as Gothic cinema, Gothic dramas, you know. Um, and then you have the Southern Gothic that comes out afterwards, Night of the Hunter, which believe it or not, I do have my notes raw too. If I can shine it correctly where the light's not killing it. This is actually a 2-disc deluxe remaster edition from Kino Classics. Absolutely love this. God, if only the light didn't sit there and shine too bad on this. But I have this, but this is also Night of the Hunter. This year, I think I finally removed the cellophane wrap from it. And yeah, Southern Gothic, you know, there's elements of horror to it, but it plays a little bit more like a thriller. If you haven't seen it, I do sit there and urge you guys to sit there and see Night of the Hunter. Another one is Angel Heart, which I actually did get to sit there and see this year. So you have the Southern Gothic genre, and you even have the Gothic Noir, which I do have one specific film that I definitely know I've seen of this genre, and it's called The Spiral Staircase. And that one, God, you can throw that up in there with The Haunting and The Innocents and everything, which is funny enough. I have not even mentioned those films and everything, The Haunting and The Innocents and everything, but those are other Gothic drama, Gothic horrors that also kind of play a bit more of a Gothic drama. So it kind of plays both sides of the coin that I forgot to mention, but those came out in the 60s as well, in the UKs and the Americas, if I believe so. But again, like, God, covering them along with everything else, we covered so many films of what kind of fits this and like the decades and how things have evolved and everything. You can only cover so much. We are almost out of time, so I do got to give you guys your homework for the weekend. And if I can remember Monday to actually ask you guys, or if not, you guys can join the Discord and everything. If you were not in it, let me actually quickly snag that before I go and I drop. But before I go, I drop the homework and everything. Invite the server. Here we go. We have the link right here. If you guys are not part of our Discord server, there it is. But our homework: watch a Gothic horror film this weekend and tell me what you like about it. It's simple. It's just simple homework. You know, do your homework and everything. Funny enough, I actually had I had a friend that gave me the idea to do summer school during the summer and everything, and to like actually try to see if I can actually do better with teaching, with teaching film and everything. Like maybe we'll have film discussions, and I'll reward you guys with a certificate in film history. We're still trying to sit there and see if I'm going to do that. We're going to sit there and see how that goes. But if you're not a member of the Discord, there you go. I know I've been meaning to sit there and try to update my my commands and everything. Hopefully, I think the commands will actually work here in chat and everything. But I still need to go fix that. But thank you guys again for being here. I truly, really do appreciate it. I don't really know what we're going to cover Monday or next week and everything. I know next week is going to be the final of our 2 stream weeks. And then you guys will only be seeing me on Monday nights and everything at 6 p.m. So keep a lookout. I will be streaming the week of Christmas only on the 22nd, and then we'll be doing the last Monday of the 29th, and that will be our farewell to the new year. So yeah, we got 4 more streams left of this year. Holy shit. I also realized I've actually swore a lot more in this VOD, so I apologize if no one likes swearing, but oh well. But thank you guys again for being here. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Steven, for popping on by. For the lurkers and everything, you guys sit there and mean an awful lot. Hopefully you guys like this and everything. Hopefully you guys want to sit there and see more. Maybe in the future, I can do a little bit more deep dives. Maybe we can jump into Milia's work or German Expressionism or the Universal horror stuff. I know I covered that over on Twitch, but that's been years. We can cover the Hammer stuff. I mean, I technically am running a Hammer series. So yeah, that's out now. The next episode won't release until late January, and then the following will release the week after that and everything. Um, so like one episode per month and everything. We got that covered. I would like to dive deeper into the Italian Gothic genre, just the Italian horror genre as a whole, because that's very, very interesting. I like learning about other countries' history when it comes to the horror genre in cinema, and rediscovering or unearthing films that I've never heard of. Um, Maybe covering even the Price Corman Poe films and everything. I would love to sit there and talk about those. Maybe we'll have some special guests on. Maybe we'll talk about Tim Burton in the future, or Robert Eggers and everything. There's an awful lot. I just barely touched the surface today of what Gothic horror is, and it's a very deep, rich genre with so many other subgenres and other genres that are kind of attached to it and everything that we can sit there and we can discuss. I probably won't do it week for week per week, but I will probably sit there and like do one, skip a week, do something a little bit more easier, and then jump back into another one. Because again, I love talking about this, but holy hell, like, did I really have to sit there and dig and do a lot of editing and cutouts? Like, oh well, we won't have time for this or time for that. But we are over the time mark. Thank you guys again so much for being here, and I will see you guys all on Monday. Bye bye.